At exactly 9:14 p.m. on a quiet Thursday, every interview, every podcast, and every speech ever recorded by Senator John Kennedy vanished from the internet. Not glitched, not demonetized, gone. Like someone had reached into the very code of the web and erased his voice from existence. At first, people thought it was a cyber attack or some political sabotage. But when streaming platforms, media archives, even public radio stations all gave the same message, content unavailable, a different kind of question began to emerge. What did John Kennedy say that made the world hit mute? The answer didn't start with a speech. It started with a silver envelope, no sender, no stamp. Just 3 words engraved in cursive across the flap. The Legacy Circle. He opened it on a Friday morning, standing in his kitchen with a half-eaten toast in one hand and the other shaking slightly. Inside was a single invitation card, thick as leather, embossed with gold edges. "You are chosen, whispered among the ones who never fade. Join us and speak forever. No location, just a time. 7 p.m. A car would come." That night, dressed in a Navy suit and a mind full of questions, he stepped into a black SUV that pulled up right on the minute. The driver didn't speak. No music, no route on the GPS. Only the hum of the road and the sound of destiny inching closer. The estate was hidden in the mountains, no phone signal. No lights from nearby homes, just mist, pine trees, and an old manor lit with torches like something out of a Stanley Kubrick film. Inside, there were 9 others, influential people, recognizable faces from media, tech, entertainment. Nobody spoke. They just nodded, as if words had already been used too many times. In the center of the room stood a long oak table, and at its head, Jay-Z, dressed in black, composed, almost priest-like. He welcomed them not with a speech, but with a simple gesture. The servers brought out 10 silver cups, identical, heavy, engraved. They placed them in front of each guest and poured in a liquid so dark it looked like ink. "This," Jay-Z finally said, "is not a drink. It's an agreement, a vow, a choice." No one moved. "You sip," he continued, "and your voice echoes through generations. You refusand. We never speak of this again." Senator Kennedy looked at the cup. It shimmered under the candlelight, smooth and ancient. He chuckled lightly, thinking this was performance art, some kind of psychological game. But then, one of the guests, an actress known for her sudden fame, lifted her cup, said nothing, and drank. Within seconds, her body trembled. Assistants appeared from nowhere and carried her out. No one flinched. Kennedy's smile faded. He leaned forward and asked, "What the hell is in this?" Jay-Z met his gaze and answered, "Everything you ever wanted, and everything you'll never be allowed to say again." The room went still. This wasn't a pitch. This wasn't art. This was a ritual. Kennedy stood up, pushing the cup away. "I don't drink blindfolded," he said. Jay-Z only nodded. "Then, your silence will be your signature." The ride back was even quieter. The next morning, things began to unravel. His scheduled podcast episode never uploaded. The team claimed technical issues. His media appearances started getting canceled, then erased. One by one, his interviews disappeared from platforms, even archives. By the 3rd day, his voice was gone from every AI voice bank that once cloned him for ads, for audiobook narration, for historical preservation. Static, silence, nothing. It was as if his very voice had been cut out from the collective record. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't about censorship. This was a demonstration, a message, a punishment, or worse, a warning to others who might say no. If you've made it this far, you already know something's off, something deeper than just a secret club. So let me ask you, if someone handed you the legacy cup tonight, would you drink? Or would you walk away and risk being erased like Kennedy? If your answer is clear, hit that like button and comment the number 9 below. Let's see how many of us still choose truth over echo. The morning after his voice vanished, Senator Kennedy sat alone in his study, staring at the blinking cursor on a blank email draft. He had typed, erased, and retyped the same sentence 5 times. Something happened that night. But every time he tried to finish it, the words escaped him, like water slipping through his fingers. Outside, the world carried on like nothing was wrong. The morning news skipped over him entirely. His name was absent from political commentary. His columns disappeared from syndication, and a Google search led only to broken links. It wasn't just censorship. It was surgical, clean, deliberate, as if someone had pressed delete on his existence without leaving fingerprints. He called his chief of staff, only to get an automated response. This number has been disconnected. He called his friend at the public radio station. Voicemail. Then his publisher. Nothing. That's when he drove to the station himself. What he found stunned him. The staff looked at him like he was a stranger. "We no longer have your files on record, sir," the receptionist said, eyes darting nervously. "Maybe check with your representation." That night, he received a package on his doorstep. No label, no return address, just a simple box, jet black, no bigger than a book. Inside, a flash drive and a card with 2 words printed in silver ink. Last chance. He hesitated. But curiosity always wins with those who seek truth. Plugging the drive into an old, offline laptop, the screen blinked once before showing a single video file. The vault, 1 viewing only. He hit play. The screen showed Jay-Z standing in front of a wall of drawers floor to ceiling, each drawer labeled with a name. Some he recognized. Media tycoons, cultural icons, 1 or 2 names that made his chest tighten. Jay. Z's voice echoed calmly through the room. These are not files. These are echoes. Pieces of people who understood the cost of being remembered. The camera panned to a drawer marked John Kennedy. It was still empty. But not for long, Jay-Z said, as if reading his mind through the screen. The video cut off suddenly. The laptop powered down on its own. That night, Kennedy barely slept, not because of fear, but because of the weight of realization. This wasn't a conspiracy theory or a game of elites. This was a system, ancient in design, modern in method, and he had said no to it. The next morning, he walked outside to find his car had been towed illegally, according to the DMV. His bank account showed a flagged transaction he never made. His scheduled keynote at a global leadership conference was removed from the agenda overnight, replaced with panel pending update. No explanation, no apology. Then came the calls, not from friends, from blocked numbers. At first, it was silence, then static, then breathing. Deep, measured breathing. A man's voice eventually came through. "We can't make you drink, but we can make you thirsty." Kennedy hung up. The same message repeated the next day. Then again. The pressure was mounting like slow poison. But it wasn't until he met the woman in the bookstore that everything changed. He was browsing the history section, hoping to distract himself, when a young woman tapped his arm gently. She wore a faded denim jacket and spoke softly. "Senator," she whispered, "they did it to my brother." He froze. "What do you mean?" he asked. She looked around before sliding a small note into his hand. "They erased him too. He refused the bath, said it wasn't right, said legacy should be earned, not traded. Now, even our family can't find his voice anywhere." Kennedy looked down. The note said only one thing: "You are not alone." That night, something in him shifted. He wasn't just being punished. He was being warned into silence, into submission. But every strange call, every canceled event, every erased video was no longer a sign of defeat. It was evidence. And evidence meant proof. And proof meant power. He pulled out an old voice recorder. Analog. No cloud. No backups. Just tape and breath. He pressed record. "They told me if I didn't drink, I'd fade. But fading is better than being swallowed. So here's the truth. I said no. I said no to the cup, no to the silence, and no to the velvet curtain that asks for loyalty but offers nothing but chains. If you find this message, remember legacy isn't built by those who whisper. It's built by those who dare to speak when everyone else is scared to." He paused. Then he added, "And if they come for you too, don't drink." He hit stop, slid the recorder into an envelope, and wrote 3 words across the front. For the next voice. 3 days later, Senator Kennedy stood outside the gated entrance of a high-rise building in downtown Manhattan. The invitation had arrived in a white envelope-no return address, just a handwritten note. "If you still want answers, come to floor 47. No more questions, no more games." He didn't know who sent it. He didn't know what he expected, but something in his chest whispered that this was where the veil would lift or the trap would finally spring shut. The security guard at the front didn't ask for ID. He simply nodded, as if Kennedy had been expected for years. The elevator had no buttons, only a touchscreen that already displayed one option, 47. The doors closed silently, and the ascent felt longer than it should have, like the air was thick, with everything unsaid. When the doors finally opened, he stepped into what looked like a minimalist art gallery: white walls, black floors, and soft music playing from nowhere. But it wasn't art hanging on the walls. It was screens. Dozens of them. All frozen on pause frames of influential people mid-speech, mid-smile, mid-fame. And beneath each screen, a small plaque with a single word: approved. In the center of the room stood Jay-Z, not in a suit, not with a smirk, just a man with tired eyes and the weight of something ancient in his voice. "I knew you'd come," he said simply. Kennedy didn't respond. Jay-Z gestured toward a long black table. On it sat the same silver cup from the night of the retreat, still full, still untouched. "You thought this was about drinking something," Jay-Z said, stepping closer. "It never was. The cup is the question, the moment, the mirror." Kennedy stayed silent. Jay-Z continued, walking toward a wall that slid open like a vault door. Behind it, drawers, hundreds of them, each marked with initials, some glowing faintly with embedded lights. "These," he said, "are echoes, pieces of voices we keep so they don't turn against us. Agreements, insurance. Some drank, some didn't, but no one leaves empty." Kennedy's eyes scanned the drawers. One of them, already open, had his name on it. Inside, nothing but a voice recorder. His voice recorder, the one he thought he hid, the message he thought was safe. He stepped back. "How did you—" Jay-Z held up a hand. "You think we work in rumors. We work in patterns. Whispers leave trails, and loyalty leaves fingerprints." Kennedy's chest tightened. His message had never been sent, never even left the envelope. But somehow, they already had it, already played it, already filed it. "Why are you showing me this?" Kennedy asked, finally breaking the silence. "Because," Jay-Z said quietly, "you're not like the others. They scream, they panic. You pause. And that pause, it's dangerous. It makes people listen. Even in silence, you threaten everything." There was a moment of stillness, heavy, sacred. Then Jay-Z added, "But there's still a way, not to erase, to reshape. We don't need your voice, just your absence, your agreement to fade, to stay quiet, to not speak again." He slid a contract across the table. No words, just a space for a fingerprint and a time code. Kennedy looked down. "And if I say no?" Jay-Z smiled faintly. "Then your silence won't be chosen. It'll be taken." And just like that, the screens behind him came to life. One by one, footage began to play. Private meetings, phone calls, conversations Kennedy had long forgotten. Some he didn't even know had been recorded. His face, his voice, edited just enough to imply things he never meant. He reached forward, pausing a screen that showed him laughing mid-sentence. In context, harmless. But cut like this, it looks sinister. "You can shape the narrative," Jay-Z said, "or we will." Kennedy stared at the contract, then at the drawer, then back at the cup. He picked it up not to drink, but to examine. He turned it in his hand, watching the dark liquid shimmer like oil. He brought it to his lips, paused, then smiled. Still not thirsty. And with that, he set the cup down and walked out. No guards followed him. No alarms went off. But he knew something had shifted. The next move was already in motion. As he exited into the cool night air, a group of people passed him, young, energetic, oblivious. One of them stopped, staring at him. "Hey, weren't you that guy on?" But the rest pulled her along before she could finish. They didn't remember his name. Not fully, just fragments. And for the first time, Kennedy felt the cost of disappearing. But he also felt something else. Freedom. Real, raw, irreversible freedom. He whispered to himself. "Let them erase the echo. I still have the voice." Then he turned his collar up, pulled the envelope with the analog recorder from his coat pocket, and began walking downtown toward the last honest station left that still ran on truth, not favor. The next morning, Senator Kennedy stood outside a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. No security, no marble floors. Just a single flickering neon sign that read FM 108, the people's frequency. It was the kind of place you'd drive past 100 times and never notice. But inside, truth still had a microphone, and Kennedy was ready to speak. He pushed open the door. The bell chimed like a church bell in an empty chapel. Behind the counter sat a middle-aged man with coffee stains on his hoodie and wisdom in his eyes. He looked up, then froze. You're... Kennedy held up the envelope. I don't need airtime, just a live mic. The man blinked. You know what this could do to you, right? Kennedy nodded. They already took everything. All I've got left is what they couldn't touch. 10 minutes later, the red on-air light flickered to life. The station hadn't had this many live listeners in years, but something about this broadcast had felt different. Electric. The frequency carried weight. He adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and then he spoke. You probably don't remember my name. That's not your fault. That's theirs. They made you forget. Scrubbed my voice, deleted my image, called it technical maintenance. But here's the truth. I was asked to drink from a cup, not of water, not of wine, but of silence. He paused, letting the words settle. They said if I sipped, I'd be remembered forever. If I refused, I'd fade into dust. I laughed. I thought it was theater. But then they took my voice. Not metaphorically, literally. One day I was on every screen. The next I was vapor. Listeners across the city turned up their radios. Phones buzzed. Links were shared. Even those who didn't know why they were listening kept listening. Because something about his tone didn't sound like a man trying to prove himself. It sounded like a man who had already lost everything and had nothing left to protect except the truth. They call it legacy, he continued. But legacy without soul is just branding. What they offered me was a trade your voice for their spotlight. They asked me to vanish for the sake of comfort, but I chose the echo over the applause. At that moment, a text alert popped up on the producer's screen. FCC complaint filed, immediate cease and desist ordered. He turned to Kennedy whispering, We've got 5 minutes before they shut the frequency down. Kennedy leaned into the mic. Then let me use every second. He reached into his coat and pulled out the voice recorder. Click play. The raw audio filled the airwaves. I said no to the cup. No to the silence. No to the velvet curtain that calls itself power. It wasn't polished. It wasn't broadcast quality. But it was real. The tremble in his voice. The air in his lungs. The sound of a man choosing truth over legacy. Outside, people started gathering near the building. Headphones still in. Eyes wide. Word spread fast. Not just in the city, but across towns, campuses, cafes. 3 minutes left. He turned the mic back on. They told me I was alone. Then no one would believe me. But I think they were wrong. I think you've seen it too, people rising out of nowhere with voices too perfect, fame too sudden, power too clean. You felt it. That sense that something wasn't earned, it was traded. That maybe the ones we forgot weren't failures, they were the only ones who said no. He stood, walked to the window, looked out at the small crowd forming on the street. Some had tears in their eyes. Some just nodded. Let this be a reminder, he said, not to the mic, but to the people outside. You don't have to drink what they hand you. You don't have to kneel just because the room is quiet. And if your voice shakes, let it. But use it. The station's power flickered. The producer pointed to the screen countdown, 0 o'clock. The feed cut. Silence. But it was too late. The clip had already been screen recorded, uploaded, shared, duplicated, translated, echoed. That night, Number the Voice Returns trended worldwide. People began digging, finding old footage of Kennedy, remembering him, piecing the puzzle together. Even AI-generated speech models began detecting deleted traces of his past recordings. And as for Jay-Z, he was scheduled to appear at a private gala in New York the next day. But when he walked onto the stage, something had changed. The applause was quieter. The cameras felt colder. And from the back of the room, someone yelled, "Where's your cup now?" He didn't answer. Because for the first time in a long time, someone else had taken the mic. By the following morning, the video of Senator Kennedy's raw broadcast had already passed 10 million views. People weren't just watching, they were reacting. Stitching his words into music, turning his speech into poetry, printing shirts with the phrase, "Don't drink the cup." It had become more than a broadcast. It was a rupture. A fracture in the perfect mirror that had reflected a too clean version of success for far too long. And for those who had always sensed something wasn't right but couldn't put it into words, Kennedy's voice gave them vocabulary, gave them permission. But while the public was awakening, the system was tightening. That evening, Jay-Z's team released a statement calling Kennedy's claims delusional fiction. News outlets began spinning narratives. Former senator suffers breakdown. Voice deepfake scandal shakes legacy of a once great public figure. They even planted doctored audio files of Kennedy contradicting himself, clips that had never existed before but sounded just close enough to feel real. The erasure wasn't stopping, it was doubling down. Kennedy knew it was coming, but what he didn't expect was who reached out next. The message came in the form of a voicemail, a voice he hadn't heard in years. Calm, gentle, familiar. "John, this is Morgan Freeman. You don't need to say anything. Just come to the address I've sent you. Bring nothing. Leave nothing behind." Kennedy froze, not because he doubted the message, but because he had once heard that exact phrase spoken in a different context back at the Legacy Circle dinner, whispered by someone else. Still, he went. The address led to an old theater in New Jersey. Closed since the early 2000s, its marquee long faded, the velvet seats still gathering dust inside. But the moment he stepped through the back door, something changed. The room was filled with people, not an audience, but witnesses. Quiet, focused, and familiar. People he'd once worked with. Artists who had vanished from the public eye. Voices erased like his, each one holding a piece of themselves in their hands, a notebook, a reel of film, a song, a manuscript. And in the center of the room stood Morgan Freeman. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked Kennedy in the eye, then walked to a covered object beside him. He pulled the cloth away, revealing a second wall of drawers. But these were different. No names on them, just symbols. Stars, moons, waves, empty spaces. "These," Morgan said softly, "are the ones who said no, the ones who kept their voices. Their stories live here not for power, not for fame, but for memory." Kennedy approached, unsure what to say. Freeman continued, "They call it legacy because they want you to believe it lasts longer than truth. But truth doesn't need to last. It just needs to be heard once, by the right ears." Kennedy asked, "Why now? Why tell me this?" Freeman smiled. "Because they overplayed their hand. They tried to erase you so hard, they made you louder than ever." Then he pointed to the far corner of the room, where a small screen flickered. It showed a live feed from the gala Jay-Z was attending in Manhattan, but something was wrong. He wasn't on stage. He was pacing backstage, sweating, angry, whispering harshly into his phone. Then, the camera zoomed in on the audience. No applause, no phones held up, just confusion, people whispering, pulling up Kennedy's video in real time. And then the unthinkable. A staff member walked up to Jay-Z with a tablet. On it, a headline from a major outlet. "Voice leak proves Senator's Truth AI experts confirm doctored audio files used by Legacy Syndicate." The damage was done. Back in the theater, Kennedy stepped closer to the drawers. "So what happens now?" Freeman looked out at the quiet crowd. "Now, we remind them that legacy isn't a contract. It's a choice. And you just made the hardest one of all." He handed Kennedy a small metal tag. On it was no name, just a single word, unfiltered. Kennedy looked at it, then slowly smiled. Far away, in the gala's main room, Jay-Z finally stepped on stage. But the lights didn't rise, the mic didn't work. And in the front row, a teenage girl stood up holding a cardboard sign that read, "I'd rather be forgotten than controlled." The room erupted, not in applause, but in people standing and leaving, one by one, quietly, powerfully. And as Jay-Z stood frozen under the silent spotlight, he realized the thing he had feared most had finally happened. Someone else had written the story, and this time, it wasn't his to control. 2 weeks later, Senator John Kennedy sat alone at a wooden desk inside a small, independent radio station in Vermont. No cameras, no headlines, just paper, ink, and a microphone. Outside, snow fell in quiet sheets, and the world had settled for now. The storm had passed, but its aftermath still pulsed beneath the surface. People were waking up, questioning, rewatching, rediscovering old voices they'd forgotten. The system hadn't collapsed, but it had cracked. And for the first time, truth had slipped through. He looked at the recorder in front of him. Not broadcasting this time, just archiving. A final message. Not to expose, not to retaliate, but to pass something on. He pressed record. "I used to think legacy was about what people said when you were gone. Now I understand it's about what you dared to say when everyone else stayed quiet." He paused, letting the silence breathe, then continued. "They told me I had two choices, obey and be remembered, or resist and be erased. I chose a third. I chose to be real. I chose to speak. I chose to risk being forgotten if it meant holding on to something they couldn't touch: my voice, my name, my soul. He sat back for a moment, staring at the snow out the window, then leaned in again. There's a system out there. You've seen parts of it, felt it. That moment when something rises too fast, too perfectly. When a voice disappears without scandal. When the ones asking hard questions go suddenly quiet. That's not coincidence. That's choreography. His voice lowered, more personal now. But here's the truth. They only win if we let them define what winning is. They built the cup. They filled it with illusions. They told us drinking was the only way to matter. But what they never understood is that silence isn't always submission. Sometimes it's strategy, and sometimes it's the sound that comes before the roar. He stopped the recording, not because he was done, but because he knew enough had been said. Later that day, in cities across the country, something strange began to happen. Billboards that once displayed ads for streaming services or brand slogans were covered in plain black paint. On them, in white block letters, "Do not drink." No logos, no sponsors, just the words. A movement had begun. Not loud, not angry, but steady, deep, resonant. People who had once stayed silent began sharing their own versions of the cup. A dancer who turned down a suspicious contract. A coder who deleted a blackmail file instead of using it. A teacher who refused a scripted curriculum. Stories poured out not as accusations, but as awakenings. And then, one final twist. Jay-Z released a video. Not a press conference, not a denial, just a quiet video on a blank screen. In it, he looked straight into the camera. No entourage, no edits. "I built something I thought was power," he said, "but it was only control, and control rots. I wanted to be remembered, but now I'd rather be forgiven." He paused. "To Senator Kennedy, what I did, what we did, you were right to say no." He reached off screen and held up the cup. Then, slowly, he poured it out. Off camera, the sound of the liquid hitting the floor was the loudest part. He said nothing more. The video ended. The world didn't cheer. It didn't cancel. It just watched. And for once, it thought. Back in Vermont, Kennedy received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a photo. A young boy holding a handmade sign at a school rally. The words written in crayon, "My voice matters too." Beneath it, a scribbled note. "Because you said no, I know I can too." Kennedy smiled, folded the letter carefully, slipped it into the back of his notebook, and as he looked out into the falling snow, he whispered to no one in particular, "I was never afraid of being forgotten. I was afraid of being remembered for the wrong reason." He stood up, put on his coat, and stepped outside. The silence didn't scare him anymore, because now the world was finally listening.